greenhouse. And so they're pretty easy to start early. So this is a patty pan squash. They come in lots of different colors. Sometimes they're green, sometimes they're all yellow. This particular variety, I can't remember the name of it. I'll put it up on the screen. I just like the color combination of that yellow with that green tip. They are very similar in terms of summer squash to zucchini. You grow them the same way. However, I think they are much firmer, less watery, and better flavor. And so literally, I grow patty pan squash for this recipe. I love it simply sauteed with some eggs in the summertime. I'm not a huge zucchini or summer squash lover, although I'm learning this year some new tricks, and so I am slowly finding new ways to cook it that I prefer. And yes, I've tried it on the grill, and that does not, it's not enough to redeem it, in my opinion. It's funny how many people mention that when I say I don't love zucchini, and they're like, you should try it on the grill, as if I had never thought of that. I love that. All right, so I have a nice slightly heated cast iron pan here, a little bit of olive oil. And I'm just gonna saute the onions and the patty pan. With a little bit of seasoning salt. Ooh, got a good whiff of pepper there. My heat is not super high here, so I can get this spread out and cooking, and then I'm gonna cut up some tomatoes. These are some of the first cherry tomatoes. They're finally starting to come. We had a super cold, wet spring, and so the tomatoes got planted out and they were fine, but the soil temperature wasn't very warm, and so they just kind of sat for the longest time. They did not really do anything, and so they're a couple of weeks behind where they normally would be. Got a bunch of different varieties here. This is a cross. I had sun gold tomatoes planted next to German pinks, which are a great big heirloom beefsteak tomato, and I collected seed from the German pink, and then when I grew them out, everything was a cherry tomato. And so people who tell you tomatoes don't cross, they do sometimes cross. And so what I've ended up with is this orange cherry tomato that has got a fairly nice flavor, and then I've been growing out the seeds from this to see what I get, and those tomatoes are turning out to be red cherry tomatoes, so it's been a fun experiment. I had a little extra room in my garden. The ones here with the little point on the end, that is Principesi, and if you've ever read Barbara Kingsolver's book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, which is a wonderful book about eating local, I highly recommend it. It's one of the varieties that she grows in there. They are an heirloom Italian variety that are often sold like the whole truss, so the whole arm of the tomatoes all together are sold that way at farmers markets, and they're often dried, so they make a nice little dried tomato, but they're a nice little eating tomato as well. And they have that very distinct little nipple on the end, which I always think is very fun. The yellow ones are called a white cherry tomato, and then the darker ones are chocolate cherry tomato. One of the other red ones in here this year is cherry bomb. And then I think these little tiny ones are called honey drop. And if I'd known they were going to be this small, I would not have grown them. They're a little too small for what I want to use. If I'm going to go to the trouble to grow a tomato, I don't want it to be a huge ordeal to pick it. And because these are small, they're going to take twice as much time to get the same amount of volume. So I probably won't be growing those again, even if the flavor is fantastic. And then this one, I don't know why it has a point. That's unusual. But this is Sunrise Bumblebee. And I'm also growing a green bumblebee that isn't quite ripe yet. So lots of fun cherry tomatoes coming in. They all have slightly different flavors. I don't particularly have a preference yet. Turn that up just a little bit. This seasoning salt has some garlic powder in it. I am a little garlic in this is good. And I really don't want these patty pans to be super soft. I just kind of want them to be warmed up and heated through. I am not a big fan. Part of why I don't like summer squash is the texture. And so I prefer it on the raw side, on the firm side. So I'm not gonna cook these very much. Just enough to get that sweated down and those onions soft. Oh man, that smells good already. I'm just gonna scramble a couple of eggs here. It's always interesting, like, I don't know if you can see that, 2 different eggs in there. Those are for my own chickens. They all have the same diet, and one of them is distinctly more orange than the other. Chickens vary in terms of what they eat, and how much they eat, and how much they're eating the grain that I'm feeding them versus going out and foraging. Also age, and so, yeah, you'll get a little variation in terms of your egg color just based on what they've been eating. Let's add a little bit more seasoning to that. That's probably about as done as I need it to be. I'm going to throw the tomatoes in. And this is another thing where I just want them barely warmed up, mostly to release some of their juice. And I'm just making a scramble, so this is all just going to get mixed together. And this is easier in a nonstick. My cast iron is pretty well seasoned, so this works fairly well, but it seems like the more you stir it, the more it starts to stick. It just happened to be on the stove. We made some quesadillas last night. And so the pan was sitting on the stove and it was already, it didn't need to be cleaned, and so I just decided to use it again. See, that's what you want with a cast iron, where it doesn't stick at all. I'll turn that heat down just a little bit. I can feel that that's pretty hot. And everybody's got their preference in terms of how done they like their eggs. As a kid, I was definitely it needs to be all the way cooked too hard. And as an adult, I'm becoming more and more a fan of slightly softer. Well, that's doing a nice job of not sticking today. We'll take that. All right, there's enough residual heat in there to finish cooking that. I'm just going to turn the heat off, because that big heavy metal is going to retain a lot of that. And then I'm going to throw a little cheese on it. This is a local cheese called Walla Walla White by Walla Walla Cheese Company. And I am so grateful to have local cheese available to us. Dairy is not an easy thing to do in Washington. We have a tremendous amount of rules. And to sell any kind of dairy at all, you need about $100,000 worth of infrastructure. You can't do a cow share. There's like all the typical loopholes that people have for dairy in most states. It is none of that flies in Washington, so it's a real pain in the butt. which means it's not an easy thing for anybody to start doing any kind of dairy sales, and it takes a lot of effort. So I'm incredibly grateful that they are doing what they're doing. We have a couple of great cheesemakers in our area. All right, and that's it. Just enough to get that cheese melted. Heat is off. Pan is very heavy. Woo! Runaway tomato. There you go. So patty pan squash, fresh garden tomato, fresh onion scramble. You can put a little salsa on this. You can put a little avocado on this. Honestly, it doesn't need anything. It's great just as it is. So super quick way to use up garden fresh produce. And you can also throw other things in here, obviously. But just this simple combination of tomatoes, patty pan squash, and onions. Beautiful. Enjoy.